Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should. And please check out getItinwriting.net/shows for a full list of our podcast YouTube series.
My guest is Jeff Fair. He is a composer, sound designer. I don't know, what would you call yours in this day and age? I guess everybody has multiple hyphenated titles,
that's right?
right?
I'm a multi-hyphenate.
Oh, I like that. A multi-hyphenate.
Yeah, I'm a producer, composer, sound designer at times.
Just whatever the gig
fits
needs.
The bill.
Yeah. That's part of why I'm kind of interested in talking about your career, because you've really kind of you are the epitome of circumlocucious in certain ways, you know.
Yeah, I it's funny because I get questions all the time. Well, not all the time, but every once in a while, from people that I've lost touch with for many years, and they're like, "What do you do?
What the hell do you do?" Yeah.
What do you do?
People do that to me all the time. It's like, what? Do you, and it's never like, "Oh, what do you do?" It's like, "What do you do?"
Yeah. Why would anyone want to talk to you? Well, you're doing it now, so.
Well, so what do you do? Or well, no, let's back that up a little bit. How did you get to this place where you do all these different things? There's a loaded question. Where did it start?
Yeah, I started as a bass player in a rock band, or several rock bands.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Many years ago, much like
like
yourself,
myself,
I believe.
yes. Mm-hmm.
But I was always interested in synthesis as well. And I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I worked in a music store, and I had access to certain synthesizers. I bought my first Mini Moog for $20 a month,
Ooh.
Yeah.
The installment plan.
Layaway. Or actually, it was installment plan. Yeah. And I guess I've been a lifelong learner, is what some people might say. And, the music business, over the number of years that I've been in it, has not been a necessarily stable endeavor. And it's always changing. Needs are always changing. And much like yourself, at one point I actually worked at a company called Hybrid Arts, something we share.
Oh, indeed, yes. In fact, I think we just missed each other by a couple of months there. You left and then I came in.
Yeah, probably. I'm sorry that...
I'm sorry you had to go through it too,
Yeah.
But it's interesting though, because as you point out, all of those things kind of they form who we are in a way.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're doing one thing and it's kind of the standard path, and you'll see something over here and you'll know, oh, that's going to be building, and that's going to be something I want to be involved with.
I call it short attention span theater.
Yeah, it's a shiny object.
Yeah, it is.
A little bit of that.
It is.
And when FM synthesis started happening with the advent of the DX7, the Yamaha DX7, I really dove into that. I would keep these notebooks and I would write out the algorithms, and I would, figure out basically what was happening with the waveforms in the different algorithms and kind of the math involved. And then I just keep track of a lot of stuff.
Interesting.
And then I started DX programming for a lot of people.
Now I'm curious. I just want to take a little bit of a diversion here and into a rabbit hole, because I'm curious about this. You were obviously already into synthesis and into analog synthesis. What in particular was it about FM synthesis, with its layers of menus and convoluted navigation, that appealed to you more than analog synthesis?
Well, that didn't appeal to me.
Okay.
But that was also where I saw an opportunity.
The
green screen was an opportunity, because I knew that most other musicians were not going to have the patience to program a DX7.
Yeah, nobody got past the presets.
Oh yeah, and so one of the first things I started doing was making presets and selling presets to
That's
people.
lucrative.
Well,
for the day.
It was okay. It was okay. And I was also working at Hybrid Arts. I was their head of research and development for a period of time. And being there, as you know, you would be there, and all of a sudden, all these different artists would stop by and hang out.
Yeah.
And other people as well. Timothy Leary.
Really, I missed that one.
Really?
Yeah, I got Oscar Peterson though.
What did Oscar come by?
Oscar came by, yeah.
Yes, he did. I don't think he ever came by while I was there. But Todd Rundgren would come by, Joe Zawinul.
Yeah, Joe was a big Hybrid Arts guy.
Yeah, yeah. Lee Rittenauer, the Grusons, Dave and Don Gruson. And so you'd meet all these different people, and they would, if they were hanging out there long enough, they would start asking you about, well, what do you do, and you'd show them some stuff, and they go, oh, I need you, to work on this record with me.
Yes.
And so there was a lot of that. There's a lot of cross-pollination going on,
And that happened a lot in our industry, especially if you had any kind of prowess for technical stuff. All the other people needed you in that sense.
Yeah, and there was a lot of stuff going on at that time that was not really fully developed technically. For instance, this was before, the advent of Pro Tools or even Cubase.
In fact, we had, I think, Sound Tools came out right around that time.
Sound Tools, yes.
And Hybrid Arts, we were working on the ADAP recorder. Yes.
The black hole. Yeah, that was.
Hey, I sold mine in Germany.
Good for you.
Somebody actually came by and saw it. It was being a doorstop. I love it.
It's just a faceplate. It takes up space in one of the racks.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, you'd meet all these people. They'd learn, things about what you were doing. You'd end up working with, people like some of the Jacksons. You'd work with, just a whole bunch of different artists. Sure. And as things were changing, for instance, working on sequencing stuff there, I'm going to say 1984-ish, SMPTE wasn't really being used for the purpose of sequencing quite yet. There was other tones, TTL tones and FSKs.
Right,
but
we didn't have SMPTE to MIDI converters or anything like that.
Not quite yet. I mean, that came a couple, maybe a year or two later.
Yeah.
And so I would get calls at midnight, I'd come down to Larrabee. We need you to fix, synchronization on something, and I go, oh, okay, I'll get down. And then as I'm doing that, they've got like a TX-816 rack or something there, and I go, oh, you might want to try this sound for that, and I'd end up spending the whole night,
Whip a floppy disk out of your pocket and
basically that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was early on.
We didn't call it that back then, but it's kind of a form of networking in a way.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
And then my life partner in both, in everything, Star Perotti, we met, basically in one of those situations. I ended up doing pre-production for an artist named George Howard.
I know that name.
He was a jazz saxophonist. He's left the planet, some years ago. But he had like #1, jazz records on Billboard. And we would literally do all the pre-production in my apartment in Santa Monica.
As you do.
As you do.
You have a recording studio set up in the corner of the living room, basically.
It wasn't even SMPTE track at that time. I think it was, what was the one MIDI track or something before? It was on an Atari 130 XE or...
Whoa.
Or, it was before the 520s and the 1040s.
Prehistoric days.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and I would do, and there's a lot of DX7 work because he had 3 keyboardists in his band. And so I would work on his projects down at Larrabee, actually, up the stairs. And I'd be up there, programming stuff and sequencing stuff. And after we finished, I think the record was called Dancing in the Sun. And he said, I'm going to go out on tour, and I've got these new keyboardists, and would you please come by Universal amphitheater. I think it was a Friday night, June 1st, 1985, or something like that.
Or something like that.
Something like that. So
Yeah.
I'm
gonna
not
check
sure.
you on that.
Could have been good. Yeah, you should. It might have been Saturday. And so I went there and went on stage during sound check and just checked everybody's keyboard patches to see if they matched the record and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Wayne Lindsay was playing in the band, who later played in the Tonight Show band.
Right.
And then Eric Daniels was also playing, and on stage right was a riser, and he and Starr were on this riser, and I met Starr, and I was instantly smitten, and the rest is history.
No surprise there.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So
you obviously had to do some kind of maintenance work for her too, and find your way into getting familiar with each other. Obviously,
well,
smooth talker that you were, no doubt.
We just kind of knew, we both had similar interests, and
you both
our
you
first
really
date
do have
was-
a very simpatico relationship. I've seen the two of you together, and you really, literally have you're a couple who has been together for a while.
we have,
Yes.
and
Mm-hmm.
she's good cop, I'm bad cop, and basically
Cool.
that's how you run the station, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Our first date, I remember we were on the beach and we were trying nodes and anti-nodes in the sand.
Okay, that's definitely a marriage made in heaven.
Yeah, and I go, but so if you double the frequency here and you put it, have the carrier, have the modulator feed the carrier, it's going to produce, if it's 2-to-1, you're going to produce kind of a square wave,
Okay, nerds from way
Yes,
back. I love it.
And she was like, she's receptive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. The thing that fascinates me here is, on the one hand, we have this tech stuff that we all do and that we all know, at
Right.
least, those of us like yourself and myself,
Right.
On the other hand, we're still very much right-brained artists, creative. We want to express that. And there's almost this invisible wall there between the two disciplines. And now you were fortunate enough to find your way through that wall. Some people do, some people don't. Some people are more frustrated technically, some people are more frustrated artistically.
Right.
But you obviously became more involved in creating the art.
Yeah. I mean, that's, it's funny you state it that way, because I've always looked at the barrier, and I'm always trying to figure out how to permeate it. The right brain thing is way more important
Yes.
than the left brain thing.
The left brain is in
most
support of the
time.
left brain, of the right brain.
Yeah, the left brain is very supportive of the right brain.
Mm-hmm.
And, trying to permeate that barrier is one of my primary goals in life.
Yeah, and it's and I mean, I had this conversation also with our mutual friend Bobby Summerfield, who is another person
I
in
love
that
Bobby.
same genre.
Yeah.
We're all highly technical in that sense,
Right.
and yet I don't know about you, but I have a certain disdain for a lot of that highly technical stuff, because for instance, I do a lot of stuff with the AES section here in LA.
Yeah.
And I love being able to go to a studio and tour around and everything. But when people start getting into discussing, which type of transformers and getting down those rabbit holes, I just glaze over, man. It's like, I just want to know, wow, this room really sounds good. And
I was hoping you'd go there, though. Sauer, Jensen, Soda,
But you know exactly what I'm saying.
I do know what you're saying. Yeah, and that's another trap to fall into a lot of the time.
Yeah.
You mentioned Bobby Summerfield, because, like I said, I love Bobby.
Mm-hmm.
And the first place I look for technical information sometimes, when it involves circuitry, is Bobby.
Uh-huh.
He's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
He hears things that a lot of people don't hear, and
Yeah.
feels things that
Mm-hmm.
that we both kind of agree with. He feels them.
Yeah. And we were talking earlier about some other tech people that we know.
Right.
And it's interesting. If I think about hybrid arts, for example, there are a number of our alumni from there
Jeez.
who I sort of kept in distant touch with, and some of them have gone way to the left brain side, the
Really?
very technical stuff. I mean, I know I've always struggled with that my entire life, trying to permeate that wall and, living on both sides of that wall.
Right.
Now, at this point in my life, living, in the creative sphere of video as well, I mean,
Right.
again, it's like we have so many things that distract us. Where do you focus?
Well, I mean, that's a really good question. And there is, there is some personal fulfillment in the left brain side.
No question.
I mean,
Yeah.
there is a Zen thing that happens when you successfully fix a piece of gear.
Absolutely.
And you go, no fucking way did I
Right,
just
right.
do that.
And there's no parts left over or anything. It's great, man.
You're
Yeah.
like, whoa, check that out. Hey, it's
It all fit together.
It's running signal. Yeah. I've conquered the power.
Yeah.
But for me, it's kind of been a necessity thing. It's like when I was a bachelor and living mostly kind of alone or with a roommate, but, disassociated basically.
Right.
I had to learn to cook,
Yeah. Yeah.
When you have your own studio, sometimes you need to learn to fix things.
Yeah.
Because certain things cost a lot of money to fix and sometimes take a lot of time.
And a lot of times they're not fixed to the way you want them either.
Right. Right.
I remember having to learn how to wire in a studio, having to learn how to, pin an Elco connector and stuff like that, because I knew that if I didn't do it, I wouldn't have that.
Right.
Because I couldn't afford a tech to do it for me.
And even when you find a tech, sometimes you'll go, you'll be going through it all and you go, this one's out of phase,
Yeah.
Oh, geez, I've got to go in now and fix that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've had that situation a few times.
So what was it for you that shifted you into more of the creative sphere? Was
The
it just
Beatles.
opportunity? No. I mean, yeah, duh.
That's where I started. I started. The left side was always kind of this thing that just kind of the window would open over there, or or something new was being developed, and I would say, like for instance, hybrid arts.
Uh-huh.
I was their second customer. That's how that happened.
Uh-huh. It's interesting. I was a customer too and got hired through that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I guess their first customer was some school district or something, but they're literally their second customer for their first sequencer. And it's because I had been working on some commercial stuff with a friend on a Fairlight.
Uh-huh.
And I didn't have $40,000 to buy a Fairlight at the time. And I wanted to be able to do that on my own,
Uh-huh.
And that's how it all happened.
That MIDI stuff.
That's the MIDI stuff, the programming, the new synthesizers,
Yeah, I mean, MIDI definitely, that opened up a lot of left brain stuff for me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Figuring out not just signal flow, but then, when you started getting into like different banks of channels and routing stuff all over the place. I mean, I remember at one point having an entire binder full of sheets where I had drawn out diagrams of my, my audio wiring, my MIDI scheme, and everything.
Oh, sure.
Because that's what you had to do.
Yeah, back in the day, absolutely. We had things, the MIDI mapper.
Yep.
I was hired on a lot of tours actually to deal with that.
Uh-huh.
Just that, dealing with the MIDI mapping for keyboard systems, and for a number of different groups like Whitesnake and stuff like that, and there was a lot of
Who theoretically wouldn't be using a lot of MIDI, but of course they are.
what was hidden.
Uh-huh. Yep.
It was hidden back in the day.
Sure.
It was under the stage.
Yeah.
With a guy who could play keyboards and sing really well. I'm serious.
Yep. Oh, I know.
Yeah,
I know.
Yeah. There was one guy that I worked with back in those days that he would always hire me to do tour prep for the different bands he was in, and he was almost never on stage. He was almost always under the stage.
Yeah. Well, when I did sessions at Cherokee, a lot of times we would bring in someone who would just, it would either be like a Michael Boddicker or somebody like that,
Sure.
and just wheel in a couple of, huge racks of keyboards.
Right.
We just direct connect everything and, run it right to tape.
Yeah.
3 hours later, he's gone and we're done.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Michael's brilliant.
Oh yeah.
And he actually started to produce a band I was in the Bay Area, before I came down here. I kind of migrated from Seattle to the Bay Area to Los Angeles.
Oh, okay. That's why you have such familiarity with San Francisco as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And you were talking about people who kind of stalked different people. I remember the singer from that band. We would come down to L.A. from the Bay Area, and we would, there's a lot of interest around this guy. The band was put together around the singer, and we would go to all these different producers, and Michael was one of them. We really liked him, and he was like, yeah, I want to produce your band. I want to, see this.
Very talented guy.
Talented guy, yeah. But then, he's always really busy, and we're trying to find time. He would fly up to the Bay Area and put us in the studio there, and I remember at one point we were kind of like hiding behind the hedge outside the studio, a few times, because it was that difficult to get a hold of.
Yeah, and well, the Bay Area scene was very, very much, it was kind of siloed and closed. There were a few big producers there. Mark Needham was there at that time also, cutting his teeth, and Matt Wallace, I think, was also up there. A lot of guys who have since come down here to LA.
Right.
But, there was a lot of, I will admit to having actually stalked David Rubinson for a while outside the Automat,
Wow.
And I finally I nailed him down
Uh-huh.
on, what was it? It was on Mission, I think. Anyway, right outside the Automat, I nailed him down one time. Hey, you're Dave. And he was nice enough to bring me in, show me around for 5 minutes, and then, get out of here, kid.
Yeah, how wonderful.
Yeah. But, there were there really was a great bed of talent up there at the time.
Yeah.
And, it was a great era.
Yeah, and it was interesting because it was kind of divided too. There were camps. There was South Bay.
Yep.
And a lot of those guys are still there.
I know.
Still doing stuff like Robert Barry and his kind of does a lot of progressive stuff.
Cookie Marenko's still down there too.
Wow.
Yeah, Cookie is still in Belmont.
Wow. And then the Berserkly crowd.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then 415.
And then of course the city.
City.
Yeah, the south of Market people.
Man.
We used to rehearse at there was a rehearsal facility at the corner of 2nd Street and Berry. Wow. Which is now left center field. That whole intersection is gone. It's now a ballpark. But it was a great little warehouse studio. It was called China Blue.
Wow.
And I remember, we always did a lot of punk rock bands.
Sure.
And we were the Skinny Tie New Wavers, so of course we were looked down upon.
Yeah, you're like selling out. We used to go up there from the South Bay. Mm-hmm. South Bay was kind of where I was located, and we would go up there to the Mabuhay Gardens, and there'd be just the craziest acts.
Oh yeah.
The one night I remember seeing. There was a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, and it was his act.
Oh.
And he had a football helmet on, and he had a gooseneck that was attached to the football helmet.
Oh wow.
And he had a microphone with a cable.
Of course.
Going back up and coming down, and he got wheeled out. And then there were these, as you know, Broadway,
Yep.
the street there.
Yep.
There was strip clubs and all this other stuff. He had a couple strippers come from like next door, a few doors down, and they had, they were taped with electrical tape.
Of course, like you do.
Appropriate places. And they'd come up and they'd start rubbing him kind of, and he'd sing, "I Can't Get No Satisfaction."
Oh my God. Well, before we get out of this rabbit hole, I'll tell you one other Mabuhay story that you'll understand right away. I have the dubious honor of having been almost electrocuted twice and 2 different gigs with 2 different bands on that stage.
I believe you.
The first time it was a bad microphone.
Right, Blue Sparks?
Yep, Blue Sparks. And the worst part about it was I was playing with a band, and we were just doing a part of the song where we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, back in with a vocal.
Right.
Right? And right during that, yeah. I needless to say, I didn't come in on time, you know.
Yeah, no, I've had that happen many times, actually.
Well, the Mabuhay was great for that,
Yeah.
you know. And
Yeah.
then second time was about a year later, and I'm playing there with a completely different band. I didn't even want to do the gig, but they were like, you know, in dire straits and, you know, cajoling, threatening everything to get me there.
Right.
And I go back to adjust something on my amp, and all of a sudden I feel I'm tingling. Turns out the toilet above the stage had leaked.
Oh, yeah.
And there was a little puddle in front of my amp. So, yeah, I've almost lost my shit twice on that stage.
Yeah, no, I can relate to that because growing up in Seattle, we used to, the band, you know, we had several bands. And it was called kind of inspired by a neighbor who was a woman, who still is a woman named Marilee Rush.
Oh, okay.
And
I know.
Marilee Rush and the Turnabouts
Yeah.
lived like just a few houses.
Just call me Angel of the Morning.
Just call me Angel of the Morning. Yeah,
Wow.
and as little kids, I mean, we were little. We would go and watch them rehearse in their basement and stuff, and sit up against the Leslie and, you know, feel that whole thing. And just it was amazing. I mean, really inspiring. But we would rehearse, you know, in the basement of my house, and it was kind of, you know, on the side of a hillside, so the basement's dug into the hill, right? Well, there's always water,
Of course.
in Seattle under the. It's not like here.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, you can dig down into the mud for,
Yeah.
you know, as long as you want to keep digging.
Yeah.
So, there always been some moisture in the concrete floors, and Blue Sparks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Must be a bass player thing, you know.
It probably is.
You're
yeah.
playing, and all of a sudden you go up to sing, and you see this arc go, you know, between it. And it's weird that you say 2 times as well, because I've nearly been hit by lightning 2 times
All right.
within like 30 feet.
Wow.
Twice. Yeah.
Okay. Third time's the charm. Who knows?
Yeah, I guess.
Anyway, let's get out of that rabbit hole.
Okay, sure.
So what I'm kind of steering towards here, though, is you've ended up, even though you still obviously have that technical gene because we never lose it, you know, for better or worse, you ended up getting much more into the composing and sound design side of things as a creative, quote unquote.
Because that's where I started. I mean, I always playing in bands, trying to write some music, you know, also playing in orchestras and jazz bands, and you know, I played sax and I played French horn growing up.
So you understood orchestration, obviously, and
yeah, I could hear it.
Yeah,
I could definitely hear it. And I went to Cornish up in Seattle. And
so you had a real hardcore, no parallel fifths kind of education, basically.
well, that actually came at another place, at Pacific Lutheran, because
okay.
because they were very much a Baroque school. I went there my first year of college, and everything was, all theory was Baroque, you know, and that parallel fifths thing was drilled into you like the day one you get there, and I remember, you know, just, you know, I would go listen to music, but I'd be working, you know, on different, you know, chord changes and stuff, and showing how to write inversions and how to connect them and avoid parallel fifths. And that went on for a year. And, you know, I was like, this is great, but this isn't going to get me to, this is going to get me to teacherhood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, you know, it's interesting because a lot of people who do have a formal music education end up in teaching. And, you know, I mean, I've taught, and I think it's a wonderful thing.
Too. Yeah.
And I absolutely love it. But I also think that the frustration that some people have in not being able to get out those creative juices. You know?
Yeah. I think I've also taught, you know, quite a bit. I used to teach a bit at UCLA in their extension program. I taught electronic music and synthesis, and that kind of stuff. And I so enjoyed it.
Oh yeah.
So enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I think about it every once in a while going, man, if I had some more time, that would be fun to do again.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I love watching light bulbs turn on, over people's heads, and
Yeah.
also just the interesting people that you would meet there as well.
You learn so much by teaching.
Yeah, you do.
really do.
You do. I mean, it really it basically reboots your learning
Yes.
experience.
Yes.
You go back and you go, oh yeah, I remember this.
Yeah.
And that works for this, and this works for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to try, you start to think up inventive ways of using things.
And you also find that in having to explain something, sometimes you realize what you've missed yourself.
Part of my gig at Hybrid Arts was explaining things to people. And I realized that it really helped me with my verbal skills. Not that they're, off the charts in any way, but I knew that if I was speaking to somebody in a way that was non-confusing about specific applications and specific procedures, that it was very beneficial to me as well.
Yes.
And when somebody would compliment me on something like that, I would be like, wow, I never even thought of that before, and thank you so much. Now I know that I really need to focus on that from time to time.
Well, and you just reminded me of the whole idea of simplifying. I lived for 6+ years in Germany, and I was signed to BMG there, and I would work with a lot of artists for whom English was not their primary language.
Right.
Their English was always way better than my German, but
Yes.
it's still, there were issues in translation that had more to do with nuance than anything else. And it's funny, people have actually pointed this out to me, but I find that sometimes if I'm speaking to a certain person, I almost adapt their accent or their mannerisms, whatever.
course.
And I think that's a normal thing.
Yeah.
But in doing so, in speaking to people who were not primarily focused in English, I found that, again, I had to simplify and I had to be much more direct with my language and avoid a lot of colloquialism and nuance, because it just does not translate.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. You simplifying is quite a tool.
It is, and it really does aid you in terms of being able to teach.
Yeah, it makes things usually more elegant.
Yeah, isn't that remarkable?
It's weird because you'd think, if I use this adverb here, it's going to be an elegant.
Yeah, this is a 150-point
Elegant
Scrabble
is,
word right here,
yeah,
man.
Yeah, really. But in Germany, then you've got all those words. Weinerseite, you don't know the sculptor down it, schreiben, See, I know a little.
Yeah, I learned. I learned, of course, because I was there, and you have to adjust to it. But and that's another thing. Learning another language definitely shifts certain parts of your brain.
Oh yes, so important.
Yeah.
So important. I mean, when I see, like, when you look at the world and you see what type of talents and abilities and certain ethnocentric groups seem to have, sometimes it's maybe not the DNA, but maybe the language that's involved in the thought process of how they're able to break certain things down,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And seeing how the language and the culture do co-influence, and that's it's funny, having traveled all around Europe, you see a lot of similarities, but a lot of very specific differences.
Right.
And a lot of that does come down to, you're having the same experience that I am, but you're having it from a different perspective, a different parallel. It's a completely different paradigm. And that, I think, it's helpful, again, in terms of teaching, because it enables you to kind of put yourself in that different position.
Yeah. Language is it's amazing. I'm not very good at foreign languages, you know. But I do pick up on accents pretty quickly though, because you know.
Well, that's a musician thing, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's because yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
because
Yeah,
I think
it
we can
is.
imitate.
That's
And,
true.
yeah, I'm too good with languages, you know.
Yeah.
Although one of my British friends once told me that, how did he say it? He said, "You can transverse the entirety of the British Isles in a single sentence."
Hey, you were just under the bell.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
Oh yeah, it's something that has to do with the bell. If you're within the range of you can hear the bell. It's very, I think it's very Cockney kind of.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, dialects in general, you know, it's funny. My wife is German, and she comes from the southern region, the Black Forest.
Oh really? Mm-hmm. Wow.
And when it became clear that I was getting a deal to move over there, and I said, well, you know, you have to teach me German. She said, no, I'm not going to teach you German because I have this particular dialect, and you have to learn Hochdeutsch, High German.
I was going to say, because isn't the Southern Germanic thing, isn't that a little like the Southern French thing where there's a little...
Yeah, a little bit. Although, you know, it's interesting. It's softer than that. It's,
Right.
The Bavarian is much more of the guttural kind of stuff,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But it's interesting that all of these different regions of Europe,
Yeah.
they've all been living right on top of each other for thousands of years.
Yes.
They all hate each other. You know, the French Swiss and the French, you know, they look askance at each other. You know,
Right.
and it's amazing.
The
It really
Italians.
is. Oh, yeah. Well, Italy is basically two different countries, you know.
More, yeah. It's
Yeah, at
like,
least,
At
yeah.
least, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife's family is in Liguria.
Oh, okay.
You know.
Yeah.
And it's very different than, you know,
Oh,
even 50 miles away.
I mean, you know, you once you get south of Rome, it's, you know, it's an agricultural country. You
Oh,
know,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
Mexico. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
With better food. Well,
Well,
no,
maybe.
you know, it depends.
It
you
depends
know.
where you go.
Yeah, it's true. It's
well,
true.
let's put it this way. You're always guaranteed good food
And lots of it.
and lots of it
Yeah.
and made without waste, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Oh,
so-
it's
yeah.
incredible. It really
Yeah.
is. But I enjoyed living in Europe. I think, you know,
Yeah.
culturally speaking, it just, you know, again, it broadened my perspective on so many things.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, we're here to talk about you.
I'm thinking about, you know, Europe sounds pretty good.
Oh, okay.
Northern Italy is like,
Northern Italy's not bad. Where I really enjoyed was not Sardinia. What's the other island? Sicily.
Sicily,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you ever get a chance, Sicily.
Palermo.
Sicily has one of the few still in existence Roman theaters. And it's interesting because we were walking around in there. You know, you see the pits where the lions used to run and
Oh,
stuff.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and we're sitting up basically in the bleachers, and I can hear people down.
That's amazing, isn't
It's,
it?
acoustics, man.
Yeah.
Just
See, that was one of the
nailed.
other things I studied in college.
Was acoustics?
I was acoustics. I was fortunately mostly in my first year at Pacific Lutheran. The professor that taught the acoustics was one of these award-winning guys, and it was just so interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I'm fascinated by stuff like that. You
Yeah.
know, definitely.
And this was, you know, this was before really personal computers as well, which has really upped the game. You know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Who was I talking to recently? John Storick. You know.
Oh yeah.
And you know, John is very much he's a left brain, you know, in every sense, and brilliant, obviously, you know, but he really does understand the whole idea of an artistic view on things, and even with architecture, you know, within architecture there is still that right brain component of, you know, how do we create something that is pleasing, that is, you know, an experience, an artistic experience.
Right. It's art plus form plus function.
Yeah,
And
yeah. It's fascinating to me. You know, I think you have managed to somehow kind of marry those two disciplines of,
Thanks.
you know, the left brain and the right brain.
Thank you.
And you know, obviously, one pursues one or the other. At a certain point, you had to kind of, what's the old Yogi Berra saying? You come to a fork in the road and you take it,
Smaller than the average berry.
Exactly.
Yeah. So much of what I dealt with, I think I'm just the luckiest guy on the planet, a lot of times. That's just basically...
Well, it's all about timing.
It's all about timing.
And serendipity.
And I don't want to get into this, but, right now, it's what's going to happen with AI,
Yeah. Yeah. None of us really know. On the one hand, I try and think of it like when synthesizers came out, when drum machines came out, on the one hand, you'd have people saying it's going to replace musicians. And then, on the other hand, you think, well, who's going to be playing these things?
Right.
Is it going to be just another paintbrush in my palette? I don't know.
Yeah, it's really hard to tell. Nothing, as you know, working in recording studios, when there's a brilliant musician laying brilliant track, the real-time experience of that is unsurpassed by anything else you could do.
Absolutely.
A concert, whatever. It's not the same. If you're in the studio and you're seeing Paulinho da Costa listen to a track once and then put his table up and just start playing that stuff, and you go, I remember being in the studio, and there'd be times people would just, all of a sudden the control room's crowded because they knew a special musician was going to lay a track. And I'm not sure AI is ever going to get there, I just don't know.
AI is not going to play bass like Nathan East, and AI is not going to, but, if you think about it, there's always been, it's not a hard divide, but it's a spectral kind of a thing between art and commercial. And, art and artisan maybe is a better way to phrase it. But, there are artists for whom creating is all there is. And creating something that is beautiful is success in that definition of it. And it doesn't matter how many, it doesn't matter even if anybody ever hears it, let alone buys it.
Right.
It's a creative success.
That's way, way, way more important. At least at this time in my life.
Yeah, and there are some artists for whom that has been a path to success. The David Bowies of the world who are brave enough to completely, continually reinvent themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
On the other side of that is the monetization aspect, where this big machine that we feed wants to have consistency because it guarantees income, and that income is what moves the machine. So, you want to have a record that's just like the record you made last time, that kind of thing.
Yeah, but there's a focus point that, at least for myself and Star, I know, is very important, is that we won't take every gig that comes along, just because we really have to. The first thing we have to do is we have to see, okay, if it's a production, for instance, we see what it is, and then we have to figure out, before we take it or not, where is it going to be when we're done with it.
Right.
If we're not able to figure that out and be excited about that, or at least be fulfilled by that,
motivated
in some way, it's not worth the time.
Mm-hmm.
And as you go through your life, your time becomes more valuable every day that you're doing it.
Yes.
And I know it may sound highfalutin to some people. Other people might disagree, but it's so much of it is about the self-fulfillment.
Yeah.
I mean, one of my favorite things to do is, in the middle of the night, come down and play around with the Mini Moog and the semi-modular stuff, and let it start rolling, and try to go someplace else. I mean, I remember I was in a band, and we were put up in a house in Pacific Grove for a while with a guy named Father Charlie,
Ooh.
who used to be the district attorney of Santa Cruz.
Uh-huh.
And then he became, I believe his charge was the study of Jewish mysticism for the Catholic Church.
Whoa.
So he was a wealthy man. He owned a lot of properties up in Pacific Grove, Carmel, Monterey. And this band, the first stop that we had, that was put together around the singer, and they put us in a house in Pacific Grove. That was Father Charlie's house. And in a way, I can relate to what he would do, because we would see him at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, standing at these big windows looking out towards the ocean in a trench coat. And he had this little dog, Socrates, right next to him. And he'd be astral projecting. He'd be gone.
Yeah.
And that's, and he got such great joy out of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, sometimes what you have to kind of go for to make every day in the art of it fun.
Yes. Yes.
You know?
It's very true. And it's, it's a space that we are fortunate enough to be in our lives, where we can make those kind of choices. A lot of younger people don't feel they have that option.
They do, but they don't feel they do.
Exactly. Thank you. That's exactly what I think there is a tendency, and again, I go back to having taught younger people.
Right.
There is a tendency to have a pretty focused goal in mind as we are younger. And, we don't end up there. We never end up there.
Oh.
We end up somewhere completely, but the idea of trying to focus on this one particular thing, sometimes we're so, I call it aperture blur. We're so focused on that we don't enjoy the journey.
Right.
And we don't see the opportunity, of the alternate paths.
Yeah. Well, there's a term we use here. It's basically, there is no there.
Yeah.
It's the path.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the enjoyment happens.
Yes. It's
That's
building the bridge as you walk on it.
Where the success happens. You say that, and I realized I was having lunch with a colleague, who was in this band with me that was up in Pacific Grove, and it was a really good, power pop band at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me basically the story that the band that I didn't know, and he just literally, told me, he said, well, yeah, we had a deal with Epic just after the singer left, and because our lawyer, I guess Pete Paterno at the time, he called him and he says, where's your singer? He says, well, he went home,
Oops.
Well, oops. He says, well, after I spent all this time putting this deal together with Epic, and I never knew. And at the time, I was thinking, God, it's a good thing that didn't happen. Even though that was my goal at the time,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
to be
a rock star.
a rock star, to be a pop, power pop bassist at the time. And I loved pop, I loved, I loved fun music.
That's
Cheap
funny.
Trick.
We have so many parallels there. I mean, I put together a record with a band in Germany, and then got them a deal with Interscope just after they broke up.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing, And again, I think it's my friend John Jennings, who over at Royer, he had this great observation once. He said, it's not always the doors that open. Sometimes it's the doors that close.
Yeah, that's true.
Because that's what redirects you.
Right, and the windows that open.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that the path is one that in certain ways you have to be willing to just kind of follow. I don't want to say blindly, but to a certain extent, have some trust in what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, not blindly trusting again, and not not just letting things happen.
Yeah.
We try and influence things, but really, how much influence do we have?
Yeah, it's true. And man, sitting in front of an orchestra when it's playing in a recording studio, in a scoring stage,
Breathtaking.
What's better?
Yeah.
I mean, that and guys like Paulinho da Costa and Nathan and Abe and, all
Yeah.
those guys, just being in their presence it's amazing.
It is. And it's an honor,
Yeah.
and I mean, I consider all of us very, very fortunate
Yeah.
in having been in this industry in this time.
Right.
I think, well, and that can lead me to the question I normally close these with,
Okay.
which is highly appropriate. So, what's different now and what stays the same? What would you tell 15-year-old you coming up in this day and age? You have a young daughter who has recently come up in this industry as well.
Yeah. Wow.
And obviously has had a completely different experience than you have had, and
Yeah. I didn't get to play Lincoln Center at 13 years old. Maybe let's take a few years later than that.
Okay.
Because 15-year-old life was tumultuous at
and
that time.
15-year-olds don't listen to you anyway, so
Yeah, no, I was the adult in the situations, but
okay.
I had to be. I was the oldest kid, and my family was breaking up. And
Oh, sounds very similar to mine. Okay.
Yeah. So the things that have been most positive for me is learn to listen every day a little better. Learn to know when you need to be an A-type personality, when you need to be a B-type personality, and be able to associate those listening skills to that decision. Those would probably be the best pieces of advice I could give myself at that time, at least. Because, when you're that young, you're like...
Oh, of course. You know everything. And you're indestructible.
Yeah, we used to have a phrase, we still use it with my daughter, even though she's not a teenager anymore. We would hire a teenager while they still know everything.
Exactly, yes, yes. But, it's really, it's interesting that you say that, because you're right, it does come down to reading the room.
Yeah.
And drilling down even further than that, it comes down to human dynamics.
Right.
Communication. It's always about communication, being able to understand. I've learned so much from doing this show and interviewing people. I really enjoyed Dick Cavett's autobiography.
Wow.
And, because I always felt he was a very, very intuitive interviewer. Right. And he tells this one story about how when he before he got his show, he was a writer for Jack Parr.
Yes.
And he said when he got his show, Jack called him up. And he said, kid, they always, kid, I got one piece of advice for you.
Yeah, a lot of those guys.
He said, don't do interviews. Have conversations.
Yeah.
And that is what I've really tried to do with every single one of these. It's like I feel it's so important to be able to really allow the conversation to open up, allow people to open up, and have these conversations that are more about, well, what do you think? Well, what was your experience?
Yeah.
And hear them, rather than this tendency that so many of us have to just, be waiting to, whatever you're saying, I'm not really listening because I'm waiting to tell you something.
Right. Right. It's, in full disclosure, there was no list of questions sent to me.
There never is.
When I'm sitting down here, I'm going, oh, what are we going to talk about?
That is how I've done these since the first one. Yeah.
I think it's great.
Yeah. To me, it's more valuable because I don't want you preparing things in your head.
Yeah.
I want the real person.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think I've been successful here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Jeff Fair, thank you for being my guest.
It's so fun, Danny.
It's been absolutely fun. I'm glad we finally got to do this, too.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.